So a massive cleanup operation is underway this morning after hundreds of kilometres of the nation's east coast was battered by a massive storm. The extraordinary weather event has claimed at least one life, with a man killed when his car hit a tree during a deluge at Buderim, north of Brisbane. Shortly we'll hear from reporter Jake Lapham in Bellingen in New South Wales. But first to Bronwyn Herbert, who's in Tumbulgum.
The rain has actually eased here, Ros, which is welcomed by the locals. We've had heavy falls really over the past 3 days. Floodwaters are continuing to rise here in Tumbulgum on the Tweed River, so we're close to the Queensland border. The flood levels earlier this morning were predicted to hit the major level around lunchtime. That has just been downgraded. It'll go just below a major flood sometime between 12 and 1 p.m. today. So residents are really landlocked here now. They've moved their cars up to higher ground where there's a safe point, and are now watching it out as the floodwaters will continue to rise over the next few hours. There are also minor to moderate flood alerts out across the northern rivers, the Brunswick River, the Wilsons River and the Richmond Rivers around Lismore and further south as well.
We can see how humid it is there, Bronwyn, with the lens fogging up a little bit. But where are the evacuation warnings in place?
Yes, the evacuation warnings are a precautionary measure. They're really around the Tweed Valley where I am now. So Tumbulgum, Condong, Tweed Valley Way and South Murwillumbah. Residents in those areas have been alerted by the State Emergency Service really take precautions and to be ready to leave their homes if required. It's really that early notice for them just to be aware of potentially what could happen. But as I said, that major flood warning has just been downgraded in terms of how far that water will rise. But everyone is really just keeping a close eye as to how quickly the water rises. Thankfully, though, the rain has stopped now, so it's just a watch and see.
All right, to Jake now in Bellingen. Jake, what have the conditions been like there overnight?
Yes, good morning, Ros. The rain's just absolutely started tumbling down and the wind's picked up in the last few minutes. I just might step out of the frame so you can see what the Bellinger River there and the Lavenders Bridge behind me now. It is fully submerged, and that is because over 180 millimetres of rain has fallen in this region overnight, and this already swollen river, 5 days worth of rain has fallen into it, and late last night it became submerged. The council here has closed off this particular bridge, and there is a moderate flood warning for the Bellinger River today. It's expected to peak later on this morning, and the SAS are advising property owners downstream, especially farmers, to move livestock to higher ground, and obviously don't drive through floodwaters. It's a good day to stay put.
And how are locals coping with all the water, Jake?
Yeah, they're pretty optimistic about it, I must say, Ros. Rain and indeed floods are nothing new for this community. They've seen it all before. Indeed, this bridge went under earlier this year, and they have had about 5 days to prepare. They've got candles and food, and I think now they may come down for a sightsee to this particular vantage point, but they'll quickly go home and get settled in for the day because, of course, the bridge is cutting off one part of town to the other. I had a chat to a local Mick earlier this morning. Let's take a listen.
Beautiful to see a bit of a flood here, but it's not a big one.
Yeah.
Seen a couple of really good ones start it was a big one in 2007-8, something like that. I think there is a very strong sense that rather floods than bushfires, given that 12 months ago, there was very much that concern.
Smoke was engulfing this area this time last year from the bushfires, and now it's floods, quite the extreme. But as Mick says, probably floods are better than bushfires, and if everyone heeds that advice of staying inside, this particular region will get through this flood event without any hassle.
OK, Jake Lapham in Bellingen and Bronwyn Herbert at Tumbulgum. Thank you both. The torrential rain that's lashed much of southeast Queensland in recent days will ease today, but abnormally high tides are expected on Brisbane's Bayside and parts of the Gold Coast. Reporter Dominic Cansdale is in Currumbin. Hi there, Dominic. So we've seen some wild weather conditions. We certainly chatted to you yesterday about that. They've eased overnight, and the sun's out.
Well, after, like you say, a few days of fairly miserable conditions, the sun is finally out on the Gold Coast. It's just come out in the past few hours. And like you mentioned, abnormally high tides. Just in the past hour or so, we reached the high tide mark possibly one of the highest of the year at 1.8 metres measured at the Gold Coast Seaway. And with it, it's brought in this incredible trough of sea foam that's absolutely surrounded the Currumbin Surf Life Saving Club. And just in the past hour or so, it's brought the locals and tourists out with their families to come down frolicking in the foam. A very welcome sight after a few days of very miserable weather conditions. But we just had in the past 15 minutes or so Surf Life Saving Queensland just on the loudspeaker reminding kids and their families not to get too close to the actual watermark because there is still a severe weather warning in place for hazardous surf conditions, very strong swells. Surf Life Saving Queensland has told people to remain, even though it is sunny and quite warm, to remain out of the beaches today because really the conditions are quite rough.
Dominic, you're not going to get swamped by that sea foam behind you, are you? We just saw a wave of it came up. It got very close to you, behind you there.
No. It's tempting. I mean, we all love heading to the surf club for a frothy, but this is just ridiculous.
What's it like then in the Gold Coast hinterland now?
Yeah, so the past few days, the hinterland has been the main concern for local authorities. Lots of mountainous valleyed areas that received a much higher amount of rainfall than these coastal areas along the strip. Areas like Springbrook recorded more than 800 mil over 72 hours. And of course, while the sun is blue and it's out, and while the sky is blue and the sun is shining, all that water needs to flow out somewhere. So we are still expecting flooded creeks and riverways over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Dom, thank you. Time for a check of the weather now with Nate Byrne. Good morning once again, Nate. So we've seen these amazing pictures of beach erosion along the east coast with all the wild weather. What's in store today?
More of the same for large parts, Ros, unfortunately. It's all been caused by this trough with an embedded low pressure system that's been causing widespread falls, lots of cloud. You can see a gentle turning in it there. The low pressure system's not really being analysed anymore. It's washed out to be a trough. So still a turning of the winds sort of from the northeast to the southeast that goes around this trough. Those winds have been blowing right across the Tasman, and that's what's been helping to really build those swells over the last few days. But there is a bit of a change on the way. You see those generally easterly winds now turning a little bit from the north. Now that's helping to clear the heaviest of those swells out of Queensland. So even though you're still looking at some pretty big seas now, they have already backed off. And as we move into tonight, we should see the big swells significantly easing, but it's all just moving south into New South Wales. The thing is though, as this wind turns northerly, that starts imparting its energy into the ocean. And so we'll see another swell starting to develop, a secondary swell from the north that'll move parallel to the coast. Now that means that it's not a front-on broadside smashing of the swell into the coastline. So hopefully a bit of an easing of the erosive capabilities of that swell as we move into tomorrow. Especially, we'll see those swells backing off as well. So the wave height really reducing through New South Wales. And I've just taken us through to the radar picture, which is actually probably a good segue into, you've got another question about rain, I think.
About rain? Look at you, you're asking the questions as well.
Oh, look, Ros, you could just leave it with me.
Oh, okay,
the whole shebang.
I'm going to put my feet up.
I'm glad you haven't though, because I love a bit of a back and forth, Ros. But yeah, more big rain overnight, especially around border areas. Between Queensland and New South Wales, some totals in excess of 200 millimetres. This comes on the back of hundreds and hundreds of millimetres from the weekend and into today. We're likely to see, though, the focus really shifting southwards. For the main part, this structure's fairly stationary, but the big turning of the winds is moving south into New South Wales, and it's taking that heaviest rain with it. We could still see totals getting into the triple digits for some. It's one of those cases where if you happen to be underneath one of those cells or underneath a line of those cells, then you're really going to see the totals racing up. It's not just that part of New South Wales either. That's where the heaviest falls will be, through the north there, but it's still wet and stormy for parts of southeastern Queensland, and we'll see some falls for the rest of the New South Wales coast as well. But crucially, the warnings really are just restricted pretty much from Taree up to the Queensland border for that heavy rain that could lead to flash flooding. We've got riverine flooding as well, the Tweed River, moderate to major flooding there, and we've got warnings on right up still to Fraser Island for abnormally high tides and for that damaging surf. We're likely to see that warning coming out of Queensland at the next update, which is due in about half an hour's time.
Okay.